So hi everybody and welcome to This Month in Procurement. It's the beginning of February 2020, which is kind of crazy. And I'm joined as ever by Kelly Barner. Kelly is the owner and managing director of Buyers Meeting Point and also the general manager here at Art of Procurement. Kelly, thanks for joining me.
You are very welcome. And speaking of crazy, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is episode 300 of the Art of Procurement podcast.
Yeah, isn't that kind of nuts when you think
Congrats, how
about
time
it?
flies.
I know it's been what? I don't know, 4 and a bit years. I think it was November 2015 when we started, and I kind of, I've never gone back and listened to any of those older episodes because I would probably cringe listening to them. But I guess it shows the journey as well.
It does, but you don't look a day over 265, so don't worry about
Thank you.
it.
Yeah, I keep the same photos and things as I had 5 years ago. At least remain that consistent when it comes to the profile images.
Absolutely.
But no, it's been a wild journey, and looking forward to it continuing through 2020, which it seems like it's been a little while since we did one of these shows together. I guess it's a couple of months.
It has been, but we've been busy,
Yes.
and there's a lot of new things to share. So it's good that we're starting off the year this way.
Yeah, and just to recap on the format of This Month in Procurement. So first of all, we'll do a brief discussion on the podcast that we've had in the previous month. We do have a main topic to talk about today, which Kelly, you just alluded to around some of the things that have been going on behind the scenes that are now live on the website. And then we'll have a quick chat about what we've got coming up next month. So let's go into last month's podcasts. And the first one that we had was with Remco van Hoek, and we were talking about blockchain. I wonder if you could just share some of your takeaways from that one, Kelly.
Absolutely. So, just like they say that the best movies are always based on books, well, maybe they don't say that, but, being a writer, I say that. This conversation with Remco was based on a book that he co-authored titled Integrating Blockchain into Supply Chain Management. And I think the thing that's so fantastic both about the book and then, of course, having the conversation with him is that blockchain is one of those topics that we hear so much about, but a lot of times it's very difficult to understand either exactly what the person is talking about or what the applications of the technology are in the real world. And he and his co-authors take a very down-to-earth approach to where you actually understand what they're talking about. There's lots of case examples. And it actually makes it a lot more exciting. It brings it down into the realm of something that anyone in procurement, supply chain, supplier management could actually think about implementing and getting value for.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoyed about the conversation with Remco, one, he's got such a fantastic background,
Yes.
A very diverse background, both from academia, but also as a practitioner. He was head of sourcing, and if I'm not mistaken, he was CPO at the Walt Disney Company for a period of time. So he's got such tremendous background. And, he's really intrigued because he's always somebody who's been a little bit of a futurist, looking at where are we going to explore what really is blockchain all about? Where can we use it and where can't we use it? So we talked a lot about it, a lot about kind of being pragmatic, I think, and recognizing that this isn't something that's going to be a solution that we can use for everything. But, there are going to be some very specific use cases.
Absolutely. And they get into some of those that are really interesting.
Yeah, and one of the other things I would take away, and actually there's a couple of conversations I've had since on the topic of blockchain is, let's think about the outcomes that blockchain is delivering or the problems that it's addressing, not the technology itself, because it's really easy for us to have this shiny toy syndrome and say, okay, we're going to look at blockchain and what does blockchain mean and how does it work and all those kind of things. When really it's about taking a step back and saying, okay, what challenges do we have in the world that blockchain is going to enable, and focus on those challenges and those outcomes as opposed to the technology itself.
And in some ways, that puts blockchain into the exact same category as things like AI, RPA, machine learning, right? Very few companies or especially procurement teams are going to be going out and sourcing for or buying these technologies specifically. Instead, we're going to be leveraging solutions that embed them.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the better integrated they are, the better embedded they are, the less it even matters that
Yeah.
blockchain or machine learning or whatever it is in there. As long as it achieves what we needed to achieve, it doesn't really matter how they do it.
No, that just happens to be the vehicle that they use
That's right.
to deliver the outcomes that are being promised. So the next one we had was with Sundar Kamak of iValue. Sundar leads the manufacturing practice, and we were talking a lot about digitization in manufacturing. You know, the idea, and this comes from some of my background when earlier in my career on the manufacturing side, is that a lot of manufacturers are still using homegrown systems, and a little bit probably behind the eight ball in terms of adopting and implementing new solutions within the procurement space, because there's so much, I think, one, sunk cost, and two, that processes have been built through years and years and years and years into these old homegrown systems, that it's, there's harder change management that goes along with that change, but how necessary it really is.
But I mean, and I don't have a manufacturing background. I think for me, the thing that really stood out that is exciting in general, but I have to think is extra exciting for procurement folks in a manufacturing environment was when he talked about the need to kind of close the gap between product development work and sourcing. So for me, I mean, those of us who are in procurement in non-manufacturing, we're all kind of wondering, how is it that we can really start to hit the top line? Yeah, bottom line, that's always going to be there. But where can we really start to impact the top line? And to me, getting involved in that R&D, product development, and maybe even having contact with current and prospective customers, that is not only so exciting from a work perspective, it does more than almost anything else to reposition procurement as a value-added partner inside the enterprise.
Yeah, and as I think about my experience in that space in new product development and new product implementation, I used to be a program manager for new product implementation from a procurement perspective within the automotive space, and we wouldn't use technology at all until you'd actually sourced and you're ready to place a purchase order. So everything else, and this was in some of the world's largest manufacturing companies, and it was all by spreadsheet and by email, and there was not really a way to collaborate, except for picking up the phone and obviously going through someone's desk, but not a way to bring all that together and to encourage collaboration with the providers as well. So it's such a game changer, I think, where we now are starting to have access to that technology in the manufacturing space.
Although, before anybody outside of manufacturing starts feeling at all self-congratulatory about where they are relative to that eight ball, how many times do we hear about people still using Excel?
Yeah.
Right? So this is not like a manufacturing problem. This is an everybody problem. And sometimes it's okay, right? For some uses, it's always going to exist. However, if you have the technology in-house, if the bigger picture is there, if the investment has been made, right, everybody can learn from this need through slightly different applications to move away from Excel and towards some kind of actual solution.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about Excel. We've just spent the last 2 weeks of having our very first startup series on the Art of Procurement. So we featured 9 different providers who are really doing some interesting things. So a lot of those providers are giving access and enabling access to procurement teams for the very first time to some of this technology, because they're really enabling a different and a new business case, a lower kind of entry point. And we heard from a lot of those providers that procurement just works on the gap in the market that we saw was to help procurement professionals move away from Excel. And that's not to say Excel is a bad thing, because I think there's a lot of businesses that pitch themselves as being like the Excel breaker, if you will, for X or for Y or whatever it is. But it's enabling everything to come together in one place, workflows. There's just a lot of interesting things going on. And I loved talking to all the different founders for that startup series.
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to listen in and to compare across those conversations. And I think for me, one of the things that actually came out of it is, in my own mind, for quite a while now, there's been, oversimplification, but more or less 2 choices when it comes to procurement technology. You either really cobble together this sort of weird best of breed Frankenstein type platform, or you go with a really big end-to-end enterprise suite platform, right, that does absolutely everything. But I think it seems like where we're seeing the innovation from a startup perspective, I think going forward, there's going to be something of a crossover where you're working, yes, 80, 90% of your functionality, data management, analytics, whatever it happens to be, is covered by one mid-sized or larger platform, but there is still the opportunity for some of these point solutions that are really critical to still bring in and integrate a best of breed in that specific area. I don't think it any longer has to be the choice between just one
Right.
or a bazillion things that are all held together, with duct tape and prayers, because there's really some interesting innovations. And, whether they continue on and grow and that sort of platform plus best of breed continues, or whether they get acquired up, that is sort of what remains to be seen over the next couple of years.
Yeah, what's interesting is there's a couple of things that I find really interesting. One is how providers are coming from, I would say, non-traditional places, like new. When you think about the companies that we talked to in the startup series, we had a couple from Sweden, one from Estonia, one from France. We had one from the UK, a couple from the US. These providers are based around the world, but they're at a point where, in some cases, they've saturated their local market and they're now looking to grow. And in other cases, location doesn't matter anymore.
No, it doesn't.
And so that's, I think there's a real untapped opportunity for us as procurement pros to see and learn what's going on around the world, and how, there's such an ecosystem of providers that we have no idea about just because they're not necessarily in our local geography.
I also think we're really starting to see the entrepreneurial spirit within procurement come to fruition, because I know there was at least one conversation where, you would say, okay, well, where did you come up with this idea? Or where did the genesis come from to start this company? And the person's response was, I was a CPO who had this problem and no one could fix it for me. Right. And that has not been the case historically, that you have these CPOs, heads of procurement, folks within the business going, geez, we've got this gap from a procurement technology perspective. I know, let's go start a company. Right. So that's, to me, tangible evidence that all of our work to change the personalities and the spirits and the approaches of the people in leadership positions in procurement is really starting to change things, because they're actually pushing back out of their practitioner positions and they're starting to change the technology landscape.
Yeah, and I think this is only going to continue because there's just more money that's being invested in the procurement landscape than ever before. Something I talked about in the annual letter that we published over Christmas was, just in the last, I went just before we started to record, I went back and looked at the news of the last week and a half from a procurement perspective, to remind myself of all the different companies who have raised money, because it doesn't seem like there's a day goes by when another procurement-focused tech company is raising money. We had Scout B raised $60 million, Tealbook raised $5 million, Catalant raised 35, Symphony raised 3 million, EcoVadis raised $200 million, and that's just in the last week and a half.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It is, and that's just going to continue. So, which is exciting, but it also means that we kind of need to know. You need to have that big picture of what's going on and where these investments are being made and how they could impact us. And also, how do we change the value proposition so that we can lever those without it being, we can lever those technologies while helping us increase essentially our performance and how we're aligning our performance with the business, as opposed to just seeing them all as being replacements for what we do.
Absolutely, because clearly there's investment money.
Yeah.
And if that's to be sustainable for these companies raising money and others like them, they're also going to have to deliver and demonstrate that they can provide value. And that helps us make the case internally as well. So speaking of entrepreneurship and procurement, we have our own little startup-based project that we're actually releasing as a brand new framework this month. And that is the Procurement Inc. framework. Phil, do you want to kind of introduce that idea and share with everyone listening what it's based on and why we developed it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited to finally be launching Procurement Inc. to the world. It was named as such for a couple of different reasons. One, I think because procurement needs to be really inclusive with the business, with the stakeholders, truly immersed in what they are trying to do and what they are trying to achieve. But second, and I think most importantly in terms of the context of the framework, is it's really all about turning procurement into a services business. So in our experience, both in our professional experience as practitioners, as consultants, but also the work that we do, obviously, with the show and talking to a lot of people about their transformation journeys, what's clear is that those who have been most successful in really elevating the impact of procurement to be a truly strategic advisor has been all around developing and executing on a value proposition that just is completely attuned to what the business needs. It may not be what the business has even told you it needs. We need to go deeper than that. It's about understanding truly what their drivers, their motivators, their objectives, and then pulling in best practices, as we've done from outside of procurement, into that framework to enable us to think more like I say, more like a strategic services business, more like an entrepreneur, more like a salesperson or a marketer. And so we're working with our stakeholders in that way, as opposed to perhaps some of the more traditional procurement methods.
And this is interesting. It's actually a little bit like what we were saying earlier about blockchain, right? That it's less about getting swept up in kind of the razzle dazzle of something like the word transformation, right? We've all heard that so many times. Okay, we all know that means change. But what realistically does that mean we're supposed to do? I think Procurement Inc. does a very nice job of taking the concept of transformation, the desire to change, to deliver an expanded value proposition, and it breaks it down into very straightforward. What do I need to be? What do I need to do? Who is my target customer and how do I need to engage with them? Makes it very straightforward and actionable for procurement leaders and organizations that are trying to be something bigger, be what their enterprise needs.
Yeah, and this can be at an enterprise level, like a procurement team level, but it could also be applied at the project level, because you may not need to be all the things that Procurement Inc. helps you become across the entire procurement function, across everything that you buy. But there may be some things that are so important to the business and so complex that you really need to go deeper than perhaps a traditional procurement process allows you to do. And so when we think about what does Procurement Inc. actually mean, I just want to touch on essentially 4 different pillars. And we share these pillars as well in our white paper series that, I'll share how to get hold of that in a moment. But there's really 4 pillars that underpin Procurement Inc. And those 4 pillars are, what that strategic services business of procurement is, the way it's thinking, the way it's operating, and what it's enabling with the business. So you think about these 4 things. One is to be extremely customer centric. So that meant, as we talked about before, it's built to serve actual needs of the business, not the perceived needs of the business. So the second pillar is about being connected. So procurement organizations that are really driving that competitive advantage, they look at everybody that they deal with as a series of connected ecosystems. Ecosystems such as the supply market, such as how do you access expertise, such as internal stakeholders, and also the ecosystem of external customers. So it's about bringing all those, the insights and the data from those ecosystems into the procurement organization so that we can enable better decision making. Now, the third one of those pillars is the creativity. So those organizations, again, that have succeeded are really, they look at their infrastructure as one that enables both flexibility and agility. So it's not about that perception that procurement is deploying a one-size-fits-all approach in every situation. It's how can we kind of flex what we do based on the specific needs of each individual stakeholder and each individual project. And then the last one is the idea of being commercially focused. And what that really means is, for our procurement organizations to look and think about what's the impact of what we're buying on ultimately the business objectives. And should we be looking at that from a price perspective, or should we go to the other end of the spectrum and look at the total commercial value, which is where does that purchase fit into the value chain of the organization? So as we think about that framework, like I said at the beginning, we're just launching this. The website has only just gone live the last couple of days, so we're excited to be talking about it for the first time. To get more information, it will give you an overview of some of the models that are within the framework. You can just go to artofprocurement.com/inc. That's INC, artofprocurement.com/inc. And there will be details as well for how to go about downloading the 4-part white paper series that accompanies the model.
Obviously, we've put a lot of time into the website and into developing the Procurement Inc. framework. But some of the things that work incredibly well will not only continue, but I think improve in alignment with this new mindset. And I think that's absolutely evident in the topics and the guests that are joining the podcast in February.
Yeah, that's right. So it's, we're really going to be, I think, embedding this idea of Procurement Inc. and the philosophy, the fundamentals that underpin the approach into everything that we do, whether that's the transformation consulting, whether it's the sourcing and category management, where we're helping companies with their complex projects, and definitely in the podcast itself. And when we look at what's on in the podcast in February, now the first thing we have is an episode which is the webinar we had back in late November with Joey Yakura, who's a former CPO and worked with NC State, North Carolina State, to develop a procurement data governance survey to really help us understand, okay, how do we address this data problem that we have? Because that's so fundamental to the visions that we have as a profession, and one that perhaps we haven't really paid as much attention to because of its difficulty. Well, now it's time, as we're investing in all this technology we talked about earlier, the data's got to be good, so we can't ignore that any longer.
And there's some fascinating findings in that study. So for anyone that did join us for the webinar, absolutely listen to that. Joe knows it backwards and forwards, and there's some really critical takeaways and things to think about from a data quality perspective.
Yeah, and then next we're going to be speaking with a friend of the podcast, Kate Vitasek. Kate has been on the pod a couple of times, but not for a couple of years, I don't think. You may recall Kate is the founder and the leader of Vested, and she has just recently written a new white paper around the idea and the importance of how to bring in trusted, neutral experts into very important relationships with suppliers. Somebody who's almost a mediator of, I don't want to say disputes, because that's taking it, you have images of it being something in the courtroom, but once
boxing gloves.
Exactly. But once you have signed relationships that are built to be highly collaborative relationships, things still go wrong and people leave, and all the intentions that were built into those may get lost as the business relationship grows. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, which I'm really looking forward to chatting with Kate, because it's always a great show when we spend some time with her. And then the last one is with Everett Carson. Everett is the VP of Global Procurement for a company called Cimpress. Cimpress, you may not have heard of. They're actually a pretty big company where they have a number of smaller brands. Well, not so small brands. One of them you may have heard of called Vistaprint here in the US. But they really focus on the mass customization of basically customized goods, and doing it at scale. So each one of those companies that come under Cimpress Group, they operate individually. And so Everett's team and procurement has to operate in that mindset that we talked about earlier about procurement being a business, because they serve a variety of different businesses, all with very different needs, all based around the world. They're going to be really flexible to make sure they're providing the right service to the right stakeholder. So we're going to talk with Everett about how he manages to juggle all those competing needs from different business units to build that procurement team that does compel action from his stakeholders.
And I'm a huge fan of Vistaprint. I've actually used them a ton. And when we think back to this idea of customer centricity, right? I mean, talk about cost-effective, user-friendly, customer-centric, all those things. If the company itself, or at least the brand, in this case facing the marketplace, emphasizes those values, you can only imagine that their procurement team can also teach us something else about how to make that possible through the supply chain.
So that's what next month looks like. So before we wrap up, Kelly, do you have anything else on your mind, anything else to share with listeners today?
Actually, as a matter of fact, one last request before people leave. One of the great things that we've seen over the last couple of weeks is an unbelievable uptick in activity on the Art of Procurement LinkedIn page. So if you're not already connected with us there, obviously you listen or you wouldn't be hearing us right now. You probably also receive our emails. But if you are on LinkedIn and you are regularly there, please follow us and join the conversation, because it's the discussions and the conversations that result from these postings and these podcasts where a ton of the value is created. So add that to your to-do list.
Well, thanks for the reminder on that, Kelly. Yeah, we've been really active in LinkedIn. So both Kelly and I will be there, but of course the Art of Procurement LinkedIn page itself. So thank you for listening. And Kelly, thank you for joining me this month. It's been a pretty busy month, and, it's been a great way for us to set the stage for the rest of the year. And of course, we're always open to any questions that you may have. Always reach out to the team on social, to Kelly and I, through our emails, which is just philip@artofprocurement.com or kelly@artofprocurement.com, and anywhere else that you see us around on social. So thanks again for listening, and we'll be back with you next month. Hi there, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.